I can still feel the jungle from that day, thick, suffocating, and alive in a way that made your skin crawl. It pressed in from every side, not just with heat or humidity, but with something heavier. The weight of the unknown. We'd spent enough time out there to respect its dangers, the snakes, the diseases, the traps. But this was different. This was something we couldn't fight with bullets or training. It was the kind of fear that seeps under your skin, the kind that makes you question whether you're still in control. Or if the jungle has already claimed you, we'd already lost men to it. Deaths that wouldn't make it into any report. A snake bite here, a fever there. But what came next didn't feel natural. It started small, like the first whisper of a storm, quiet and almost unnoticeable, until it wasn't. Strange sounds broke the silence. Rocks grinding together, a dull thud from somewhere far too close. It didn't fit. We were supposed to be alone out there. Radio's dead, no air support, no backup. Just us, swallowed by green walls of silence. Then came the first stone. Thrown with precision, too perfect to be an accident. I thought it was a grenade at first. The sound it made was sharp, intentional, like it had a target in mind. It landed just a few feet away, dirt exploding around it. Every man froze. Rocks don't just fly through the air on their own. Not 20 miles from the nearest village. Not out here in a jungle that was supposed to be empty. That's when we heard movement, fast, deliberate, circling us. No footsteps, no voices. Just the sound of something thinking. Then another stone hit, harder, closer. It wasn't random. Someone, or something, was making sure we knew it was there, watching, studying, waiting, and the worst part? We were powerless. We had no clue what we were dealing with, only that it was smarter than we wanted to believe. As the days dragged on, the feeling grew stronger, the weight of unseen eyes. Sometimes it was subtle, like when you know someone's behind you, but when you turn, there's nothing there. That feeling didn't fade. It dug in, whispering that something was always just out of sight. The jungle canopy swallowed the light, turning everything into a dim, endless twilight. Every sound, every silence carried meaning, because in the jungle, silence isn't peace, it's a warning. When the noise dies, something's watching, something's moving, something's waiting. I remember one evening by the creek. We were resting, helmets off, trying to breathe. You'd think being surrounded by trees and water might bring some sense of safety. But it didn't. The air was too still, the shadows too deep, and that feeling, that choking sense of being prey, hung in every breath. Every sound felt wrong. Every rustle of leaves made us flinch. Even the smallest noise felt like a signal, a call to something out there, something listening. And soon we all began to notice it. The hush before the storm, the way the jungle seemed to shift, like the whole place had tensed at once. Then came that sound again, rock scraping against rock, low, deliberate, impossible to ignore. At first we told ourselves it was just the forest, the wind, maybe an animal. But deep down we knew better, whatever was out there. It wasn't random. It wasn't the jungle this time. It was something deliberate, something that moved when we moved, stopped when we stopped. Something keeping pace, watching, calculating. At first we told ourselves it was paranoia. Too many nights without sleep, too many shadows playing tricks. But deep down we knew better. This wasn't nerves. This was presence. Something unseen had chosen to follow us. The uncertainty started eating at us. In war, you can handle an enemy you can see. One you can fight, one you can kill. But how do you fight what you can't even identify? Something invisible, always observing, always waiting. Every branch that snapped, every pebble that fell, every whisper of leaves started to sound like a signal. A warning. We were no longer soldiers out there. We were prey, being studied by something that knew the terrain better than we ever could. The mission stopped being about orders or survival. It became about keeping our sanity, holding on to what was real when the jungle itself started to feel alive and aware of us. Then came that silence, the kind that presses against your ribs until you can't breathe. The entire jungle just stopped. No birds, no insects, just stillness so heavy it felt like the earth itself was waiting. When the jungle holds its breath, you learn to listen, because something is coming. It was around noon when it happened. We didn't see it at first, we felt it. That faint electric hum in your bones, the way you sense a storm before the first drop of rain. We were pushing through the underbrush when the rustling began. Subtle at first, like wind through leaves, until the first rock came crashing through the trees, slamming into the dirt just yards from our perimeter. Not random, not accidental. A throw, Every instinct in me screamed. I turned, rifle raised, scanning the trees. Nothing but shadows. Then another rock, closer, heavier, smashing into the ground with brutal precision. My heart pounded against my chest. Who could do that? The enemy, locals? No, this wasn't human. The rhythm, the force, the accuracy. It was intentional. The others felt it too. I saw it in their eyes, the same mix of disbelief and fear. No one spoke. No one fired. We just listened, waiting, and then it moved. At first, only a silhouette, something tall, half concealed in the brush. A shape that didn't belong. It stood upright, too still, too controlled. Taller than any man I'd ever seen. My mind tried to name it. Tiger? Gorilla? Hallucination? But none of those fit. It was something else. We froze, staring into that wall of green. The air was thick, unmoving. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every instinct begged me to run or shoot or do something. But I couldn't move. None of us could. It was like the thing had us under a spell. Not with power, but with presence. It wasn't afraid. It wasn't curious. It was assessing us, like a predator studying its prey, deciding when to strike. Then slowly, deliberately, it reached down. My stomach dropped. It picked up something heavy from the ground and hurled it with impossible strength. A boulder. Not a rock. A boulder. It tore through the air with a sound that didn't belong in this world, crashing into the earth so hard it shook the ground beneath our boots. Dirt and debris exploded around us. I ducked, heart hammering, but realized it wasn't aimed at me. It wasn't aimed at any of us. It was a message, a warning. Whatever was out there wanted us to know it was in control. It was testing us, and I could feel it. Every rock, every sound, every pause in the jungle's rhythm was calculated. It wanted us to know that it was in control, and it worked. None of us spoke for what felt like hours. The silence wasn't discipline, it was disbelief. The kind of stunned stillness that only happens when you realize your nightmare isn't in your head. It's real, we weren't soldiers anymore. We weren't fighting the war we'd been trained for. We'd stumbled into something else, something that didn't follow rules, didn't fear bullets, didn't care about rank or orders. My hands trembled as I gripped my rifle. For the first time, the weapon felt useless. The jungle wasn't our battleground anymore. It was something alive, something aware. And we were trespassers. That feeling of being watched wasn't paranoia anymore. It was truth. The shift was subtle, but real. We weren't the hunters out there. We were the hunted. The days that followed were a blur. No one talked about what we saw. Not because we'd agreed not to, but because none of us could find the words. The silence between us was heavier than the jungle air. We followed orders mechanically, eating, marching, pretending. But something in us had cracked. We were different men now, hollowed out by something we couldn't name. It wasn't the rock apes themselves that terrified us. It was what they meant. They were a reminder that there were things in this world beyond our control, beyond reason, beyond training. You can fight an enemy with guns and strategy. You can't fight the unknown. When we finally reported it, the reaction was immediate. Disbelief. The captain stared at us like we'd gone mad. His expression wasn't anger, just that tight-lipped confusion people wear when they think you've lost touch with reality. He listened, then gave that half-smile. The kind you give a child who swears there's a monster under the bed. That look broke something in me. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe we had imagined it. But no, we all knew what we saw. We felt it. That kind of terror doesn't come from nothing. Still, no one believed us. And that disbelief, that was the worst part. There's a special kind of fear that comes when the world refuses to believe your truth. It isolates you, makes you question your own sanity. The tension began to grow quietly, like a storm building far away. We started doubting ourselves. Every noise, every movement. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the jungle. Maybe it was our minds, but that feeling of being watched never left. It clung to us, invisible but suffocating. We'd scan the trees for hours, whispering to each other just to break the silence, but nothing changed. The fear had rooted itself inside us, and slowly it began to reshape us. The paranoia ate away at our discipline. Every glance over the shoulder, every jump at a sound, it wore us down. We weren't fighting the Viet Cong anymore, or the heat, or even the jungle. We were fighting ourselves. We kept asking ourselves the same question: are we imagining this, or is it real? That doubt was the cruelest part. It made us feel small, powerless, stripped of everything we thought we were. We'd been trained to face an enemy head-on, to shoot, to fight, to win. But this wasn't an enemy we could confront. There was no face, no uniform, no ideology. Just shadows, just movement in the trees, just something too big for us to fight. That's when it hit me. This war wasn't about weapons or strategy. It was about sanity, about who could hold on to their sense of self when everything around them was unraveling. The real battle wasn't out there in the jungle. It was inside our heads. I watched the others closely. They tried to bury it, the fear. They forced smiles, cracked jokes, cleaned their rifles like it meant something. Pretending to be soldiers, pretending the rules still applied. But I saw through it. We all did. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were survivors. Each of us haunted by something unseen, something we couldn't explain but could feel. The jungle had changed us. It had reached inside and twisted the parts of us that used to feel safe. We'd crossed a line without realizing it, and there was no going back. We had been trained for war, ambushes, traps, enemies hiding in the green. We knew what to expect from men. But these things, these rock apes, they weren't like anything we'd ever encountered. They weren't animals, at least not in any way we understood. As the days dragged on, the tension thickened. That's when we noticed it, something that chilled us to the bone. These creatures weren't random. They were organized, calculated. Each encounter wasn't chance. It was strategy. At first, we'd brushed it off. Rocks hurled from nowhere. Silence after every hit. We'd call it bad luck, the jungle playing tricks again. But slowly, patterns began to emerge. They were choosing when to strike, where to strike. Every stone was placed with precision, aimed at us, at specific points, at specific times. They were studying us, watching how we moved, how we reacted, how we regrouped. It was as if they already knew our next move before we made it, and that's when the true terror sank in. It wasn't the noise or the shadows or even the rocks. It was the realization that whatever was out there wasn't just powerful. It was intelligent, smarter than we could ever be ready for. The attacks weren't wild or desperate. They were calculated. Every rock, every movement felt deliberate, like pieces in a deadly game we didn't know the rules to. These things weren't just reacting, they were planning. From the high ridges and thick canopies, they used the jungle like it was built for them. They struck from angles we didn't even think possible, using the terrain to trap us without ever showing their faces. At first, we didn't want to believe it. We were trained to outthink the enemy, to use strategy, precision, and control. But this wasn't war. This was something older, something that had lived in that jungle long before any of us ever set foot in it. And the terrifying part? It was forcing us to play its game. Every attack felt like a warning. Every retreat a lure, pulling us deeper into its world. We started recognizing the same patterns, the same eerie tactics. They knew where to hide, when to strike, when to vanish. It wasn't chaos. It was intelligence. And slowly we realized we weren't hunters anymore. We were the experiment. We found signs of them. Cracked branches, piles of stones arranged in ways that made no sense, trails that vanished mid-step. But never the creatures themselves. Always just beyond sight, always watching. The frustration gnawed at us like a wound that wouldn't heal. We were soldiers, trained to fight back. But how do you fight what you can't even see? How do you fight something that knows your next move before you make it? And that's what broke us. The rock apes weren't afraid. They didn't scatter when we fired. They didn't run when we advanced. They stood their ground, tall, silent, unflinching. The first time I saw one clearly, just for a heartbeat, it looked right at me. Not like prey, but like a teacher watching a foolish student. That's when I knew we were no longer in control. The war had changed. It wasn't soldier versus soldier anymore. It was man versus something else. Something that didn't care about borders or politics. When we finally tried to report it, command brushed us off. They smiled, nodded, told us to get some rest. You could see it in their eyes. They thought we'd lost it. Even we started to wonder if the jungle had gotten into our heads. But then, everything shifted. Word came down that the Vietnamese units, the same ones who mocked our reports, were seeing it too. Whole patrols going missing. Camps destroyed. Men refusing to go into certain parts of the jungle. That's when they stopped laughing. That's when everyone realized whatever was out there wasn't just our problem anymore. When the reports reached command, they finally sent in specialists. a team of scientists and military personnel armed with more than rifles. They brought cameras, measuring tools, plaster for molds, and notebooks instead of ammunition belts. Watching them march into our area felt strange. We'd come here to fight, but they came to understand. That's when it hit us. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was discovery, a race to uncover something far older, far more complex than our war could ever explain. The first real evidence came in the form of footprints. At first they looked ordinary, until we got closer. Massive impressions, human-like but distorted, thick toes, enormous strides deeper than any man could make. When they made plaster casts, it confirmed what we already feared. These weren't from any known animal. These were from something ancient. Something that didn't belong to the world we understood. And then came the villagers. Locals began to speak, not in rumors or myths, but in stories that mirrored our own experiences. They called them Batutung, the forest people. They said these beings had always been there, living deep within the untouched parts of the jungle. Not monsters, not spirits, just another species that had learned to survive by staying hidden. It wasn't superstition. It was history, whispered through generations. That revelation changed everything. The jungle wasn't haunted. It was inhabited. We weren't fighting an unknown enemy. We were trespassing. The realization hit hard. We weren't the victims here. We were the invaders, bringing war to a world that had never belonged to us in the first place. As the investigation deepened, the encounters grew more frequent and more calculated. It wasn't just rocks anymore. It was coordinated movement, echoing calls, the thud of something heavy pacing around our camp in the dark. The creatures weren't reacting in fear. They were strategizing. They were learning. The attacks became methodical. We'd feel eyes on us long before anything happened. Then the jungle would explode with sound. Branches breaking, stones slamming into trees, one hitting our ridge so hard it rattled the ground beneath us. These weren't warnings anymore. They were demonstrations of power. We tried to call for backup, whispering into radios that barely worked through the static. No help came. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rain and fear. Every shadow seemed alive. Every sound felt like a countdown. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychological warfare. We'd been trained to fight an enemy with uniforms, strategies, and orders. But this was something primal, something that didn't fight by our rules. And every time we tried to regain control, they vanished, fading back into the jungle, leaving us to drown in silence. Then one day, everything just stopped. No more rocks, no more movement. The jungle returned to its eerie quiet, as if exhaling after holding its breath for too long. For a brief second, I felt relief, but it was short-lived. The silence wasn't peace. It was patience. They were still out there, watching, waiting, and in that stillness, we realized something had changed in us too. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were survivors, ghosts in a land that had shown us how small we really were. The jungle had taken back its rhythm, but the message was clear. We didn't belong there. We never had, and deep down, we knew it was only a matter of time before the silence broke again.